All right, it is 2 o'clock. Let's go ahead and get started, everyone. I know some folks will still be coming in. That is okay. Welcome everyone to the July edition of Answers from an Actuary. I am super excited to introduce Parker Henley, who is here, and he's going to be speaking up to us about being a consulting actuary. As always, go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll start taking those now. And after his introduction, we'll go ahead and get started with those.
All right, yeah, so thank you, Brianna. For those of you who didn't see, my name's Parker. I graduated from Drake University in 2019. And so while I was at Drake, I studied actuarial science and I interned at GE Capital, which is a subsidiary of General Electric, and a small closed block of business for long-term care insurance. And then also during the school year, I interned at Coaching Actuaries, helping create test prep material for some of the preliminary actuarial exams. And then after graduating, I joined Milliman Financial Risk Management in Chicago, where I also interned there as my last internship between my third and fourth year in college. And so a little bit of background on what my particular practice at Milliman does. It's financial risk management in products called variable annuities. So you might hear the term equity linked insurance, variable annuities. It's really an insurance product that is intended for retirement that has ties to equity markets. And our practice really specializes in helping hedge a lot of that equity risk, as well as any sort of financial reporting associated with those products, and then as well as like any sort of mergers and acquisitions or like M&A transactions where one company might be trying to sell off their block of business to another company. We will aid in that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We already have questions coming in. So Parker, if you would like to to answer, how many years of actuarial experience do you recommend people have before seeking an actuarial consulting position?
Yeah, so it really varies. And ultimately, one good thing to note, I guess, as we really start here is that the difference between what consultants do and what actuaries do in an insurance company is very close to the same thing. At the end of the day, you're both actuaries. Your real job is to assess risk on some sort of financial level. And so it's really the big difference comes in the culture of the firm that you work in, and then also sometimes the style of the work that you do. So at the end of the day, how many years of actuarial experience? It could be zero, it could be a lot. So if you've already started your career and you're at an insurance company, you really can move to consulting at any point in your career. And if you want straight out of college to jump into consulting, there's really no difference between the two, I guess. They're both really acceptable.
Thank you. Our next question is, how many hours do you usually work in a day?
Yeah, so this question often comes up a lot in comparing consulting and insurance actuaries. And I would say the stereotype is definitely true in that consultants work more often and more hours than insurance companies. And generally, pay is adjusted accordingly for that. Consultants, on average, make more than insurance companies. I would say the big difference is like, really with consulting, the onus is kind of on you on how much work you want to take on and how much client work that you're willing to accept. So you may choose to work a little bit less than other people in your firm. Other people's in your firm may choose to really take on a lot more work. It's really up to you. Me, I don't really know how many hours I work per day. It's probably close to 10-ish, maybe somewhere between 8 and 12, depending on the day. But that does bring up another thing that I often tell people when comparing the quantity of hours. It's not really just the quantity of hours in consulting. It's that consulting tends to be pretty project based and when you're busy and when you're not. And for an insurance company, there will be weeks where you work more than 40 hours or you work more than you typically do. And there will be weeks where it's a little bit quieter and you work less. when you're at an insurance company, those busy times are generally known in advance. They're close to quarter ends or certain reporting that you do, anything like that. Whereas for a consulting firm, it's really project based. So you have to be pretty accepting of that. It's not really that you may have to work a lot of hours at this point. It's that you don't really know when you're going to be busy and when you're not going to be busy. So you have to be a little bit more flexible with your hours then.
Thank you so much. In a similar vein to that, do you have an example of a type of project you might work on and who that client might be?
Yeah, so what's pretty common, this is pretty specialty specific for me specifically, because like I mentioned earlier, at the end of the day, what you do as a consultant is very similar to what you might do at an insurance company. And so whether it's in health insurance or life insurance, or in my case, financial risk management, um, our work centers around that little area of expertise that our practice is founded on. And so a project that has been pretty common recently is we have a large client that's owned by a private equity firm, and they want to grow their block of business by purchasing other companies, essentially run-off blocks of business. So another company has this block of variable annuities. They no longer want it under their umbrella. They don't want to take on the risk anymore. They're no longer selling it. So they just kind of want to get it off their balance sheet. And so they want to sell it to the client that I work on. And we really aid that client in all of the actuarial work that is required for understanding the risk associated with that particular block, as well as any sort of like financial reporting associated with that block as well. So that's a pretty common project for recently.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have, again, the questions are just rolling in, so I'm just going to keep going right down the line.
Yeah.
How is it different with consulting, with pricing and reinsurance departments on a daily basis for jobs?
Yeah, so this one gets in, and I work a little bit less in pricing specifically, but for consulting with pricing, it tends to be pretty project based. And so maybe a company really specializes, or like this insurance company is pretty small, and their kind of area of expertise is in the distribution channel that they have. And they might not really be the experts in actually pricing the products that they're trying to sell, but they're trying to like, they have expertise in like being able to distribute these products in an advantageous way compared to their competitors. A consultant, it's really going to be pretty similar in terms of you use the same fundamental concepts of pricing and reinsurance. The difference tends to be that with a consultant, if that's what your expertise is in, it's across, you get to see a wider spectrum across the industry, versus in an insurance company, you get to see that wider spectrum just within the insurance company that you work in specifically. If that makes sense.
Thank you. All right, we're going to take it back in time for you a little bit, but we have some folks asking about tips on setting for exam P. Do you have any tips for studying for those first precursor exams?
Yeah, so that's actually where some of my time at coaching actuaries helps quite a bit with this. Um, the most common ones, especially for the preliminary exams, people say do a lot of practice problems, and that's definitely important. But not only do you need to do a lot of practice problems, you need to really understand when you take this exam or quiz for all these practice things, you need to understand the fundamental concepts behind why you either got a question right or why you got a question wrong. And so when you review all of the stuff that you've done in the past, really make sure you can pinpoint why with everything that you're doing.
Thank you. And I just dropped the link to Coaching Actuaries in the chat if folks are not familiar with them. On the same, in the same vein of exam P, this person is wondering how they can get their foot in the door based on their situation of not yet passing exam P and they're sitting for exam P again in 3 months.
Yeah, so this is actually a really good question. And especially in consulting, communication tends to be a very emphasized skill. And when you don't have as many exams, and you're trying to compete against other people who are entering the market that may have a lot more exams than you, then the best way to do it is to really reach out to people who work in the industry or people who work at the company that you really want to work at, and try and just having a conversation with them. It may not really even be an interview, but just sort of building up some sort of connection. And then that really helps that company and them understand why you are entering into this profession, maybe why you're changing. And it gives you an advantage of like, this is how you can put your foot in the door. Because oftentimes, especially if you don't have any exams, there's a barrier of entry that you need an exam or two before you can even apply. Well, oftentimes you can get around that barrier if you really just make some sort of connection with someone within the company.
It's great advice. Thank you so much. All right. How difficult is the work that you do compared to the material on exam P and FM?
So I actually go through this quite a bit. And I would say there's a lot of people in really all professions that you can take all of these exams, and then in your exam that you're taking, you're given this problem, and the problem is really just condensed into this kind of like perfect package. Like all of this, maybe all of the data is really clean, or all of the assumptions are really well known. When you get to the real world, the same fundamental concepts are being applied that you learn in the exams, but one, the problem is way bigger, and two, there's way more unknowns compared to what you encounter in the exam. And so the work is definitely much, much more difficult in terms of like the problems that you're solving. But you have a couple of distinct advantages. One, you get to work with an entire team of people, so you're not just on your own like you are often with the exams. And then the other thing is that what I say is what really makes a lot of successful consultants and just actuaries in general is those that can really apply those fundamental concepts to their day-to-day life and make those connections, because it's actually a lot harder than you might think. When you really understand the exam material and can really migrate and apply that over into your day-to-day life and be able to explain that to other people, that sets apart a lot of people.
Thank you. A few more questions on studying. How did you handle studying while working?
Yeah, so that's another like common stereotype that you might hear in consulting, is that like you work a lot of hours and it's harder to pass exams. And I would say generally that fact is also true. That kind of stereotype is true, that it becomes harder to pass exams when you're in consulting. And the reason for it is kind of the culture and the reason why consulting exists in the first place. So if you look at like what consulting is that our product at a consulting firm is our time. And so if I don't show up to work one day, then I am no longer working on some sort of client work. And then Milliman no longer makes money because I'm not working, right? Whereas an insurance company, if an actuary doesn't show up to work, that's not directly impacting their revenue. Well, granted, in the long term, that's a bad thing, and like there's going to be bad things occurring from that. But in the short run, if you don't show up to work, the insurance company can still sell insurance products and they're making money. And so it's really the culture that's built around those two makes consulting a little bit harder, because there's more onus on you working more and working more regularly than you might at an insurance company. And so for me, the things that like I really emphasize is just being as efficient as I could and utilizing as many like study tactics as I could over that I had learned from the preliminary exams and earlier exams, as well as my time at coaching actuaries and just kind of what worked for me. And then finding time where I just wouldn't really be interrupted by work or other people. And whether that's like you intentionally taking that time to kind of shut everything off and like turn it away from you, or in my case, I really like to study earlier in the mornings because it was a time where I know other people are sleeping, I'm not going to be bothered, and I can be a lot more efficient with my time during the morning.
So on that, do you have any other key study methods for exam P or other exams?
For me, what works is I'm a little bit old school, but I always say what works the best is when you're learning the material, take handwritten notes. And it's not really so that you have to reference these notes later. It's more that when I'm taking handwritten notes, and really when anyone is, it kind of forces you to slow down and think about what you're actually writing and think about like the concepts of what you're writing down. Um, and so that's really my big suggestion is just take handwritten notes. And as you're kind of learning all this material, really focus on those fundamental concepts because it makes the practice exams and much faster, actually. You have to take a little bit less practice exams and it makes you more efficient in taking practice exams when you understand that fundamental material better.
Okay, so we have 29 questions right now and they keep coming. I'm trying to hear them so that we're on exam questions, but I think we might be done with those. So our next question is what differentiates consulting actuaries from other actuaries?
Yeah, and so we touched a little bit on this, but ultimately the main difference is just the firm that you work in for the most part. And I would say from a high level, consulting actuaries tend to have some sort of niche expertise. And in my case, it's in variable annuities. And so I get to see a wide spectrum of all companies that sell variable annuities. On the other hand, if you work at an insurance company, what you get more opportunity to do is go really in depth and see the entire spectrum of that specific insurance company. And so it's kind of like where your niche is. And so in an insurance company's case, it's at the company you work at. And in a consulting space, it's more of like whatever niche your particular area of expertise is. And so it might be health insurance, it might be life insurance M&A transactions, it could be variable annuities in my case.
Thank you. Shifting a little bit to AI, is the job market for actuaries saturated, and how would artificial intelligence affect the profession in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question. Is it saturated? No, I don't think so. I don't know if I really have a good gauge on it. I know a big part of what the SOA and a lot of colleges that I've spoken with as well is that there's still a lot of open positions for actuaries, and there's actually maybe it's the opposite of saturated. There's quite a bit of demand for actuaries, and those enrolling in colleges, it's declining slightly, and so it's I wouldn't say it's really saturated at all. We're always looking for good talent. Um, and how does AI affect the profession overall? That's often talked about as how AI can kind of like take over certain jobs. And for actuaries, AI is a really, really important tool to be able to use to make your job more efficient. And so you'll hear, especially as like new hire, like new into any actuarial position, is coding is highly emphasized and how well you can code. Communication is highly emphasized. AI is a really useful tool for actually both of those things. You can have some sort of AI interface that can write maybe 80% of some base code that you ask it to. And then that really saves you a lot of time as an actuary, and you can spend a lot more time understanding the numbers that you're doing, putting more detailed analysis together, because that AI is better able to do some of the more simple parts of your job that tend to be quite tedious. And then from a communication standpoint, I know a lot of companies and people that AI helps them proofread their emails or write outlines for emails or just like do some of the more basic things where they can write a good chunk of some sort of communication that's going to be distributed to people, and then they can kind of adjust it according to how they want to word it, or um, anything like corrections that they want to make. But the AI, it's not replacing you as an actuary, but it's really aiding you in just making your work faster and like more refined.
Thank you. How much interaction do you have with other actuaries or other people, et cetera, in a day at work?
Yeah, so other actuaries is basically every day, and especially at a consulting firm. Milliman's a little bit like specialized, and so we're quite a large firm overall, and it's full of actuaries. So I interact with actuaries within Milliman all the time. And then also the clients that I work with as well are also have actuaries in them, or some of them do at least. And so I'm interacting with other actuaries every day, actually, and interacting with non-actuaries also nearly every day as well. Which you will encounter both in consulting and in an insurance company. Whether it's every day, I can't guarantee that, but at least within consulting, you may be explaining your analysis or results to someone who isn't an actuary and doesn't really understand exactly what you did, but you have to convey that information to them. Or the same thing for an insurance company. As an actuary, you may work on a specific team that has impacts on other areas of the business. And so you have to be able to interact with maybe some sort of finance team or accounting or anything like that that aren't actuaries, but you're going to have to interact with them every day.
Thank you. Can you tell us about some of the soft skills that are most relevant in the line of work as an actuary?
Yeah, and so I think probably the most common you hear, and especially I heard when I was in college, was communication, like verbal communication. And that is definitely important. Your ability to like explain things and talk things through to your own team internally, as well as to people externally, is very, very important. I think one that's a little bit underemphasized would be actually written communication, because a lot of your work, and especially initially, your means of communicating with other people is by writing it down in an email and then sending it to someone else. And your ability to convey information in a written form through an email is a much different skill than you being able to talk it through. And so I think practicing and learning good written communication skills is equally as important as having good verbal communication skills. And then beyond that, there's always time management, being able to like be efficient with what you do as well.
Great. Similar question, and maybe building off your answer. How do you balance technical expertise with business acumen in your role? And do you get to meet clients face to face or virtual, or is it a combination of both?
Um, for me, I'll start with the meeting with clients. Most of the time, almost always it is virtual, especially in the environment we are now. It's so easy to meet virtually, and it's so much more cost effective really for clients and us to be able to meet virtually, and you can meet and more flexible hours depending on what my schedule is and what their schedule is. And so virtual is definitely the most common one, and it's going to be more common if you have longer standing relationships with the clients you work with. So if we've worked with this client for years and years and years, then we've already built that kind of like in-person development or like in-person connection. And so a lot of meeting might be virtual from that point. And then, sorry, what was the first part of the question? I lost myself.
I'm scrolling through all as fast as I can. How do you balance technical expertise with business acumen in your role?
Yeah, so for me, I would say coming into my job initially, I had pretty good communication skills, and it was more the technical skills that needed to be built up quite a bit. And so kind of being the person that I was and spending so much time at coaching actuaries and like drilling fundamentals into people, I would kind of do a lot of work and really try and best understand from a high level, okay, what am I exactly doing? What is the end goal of this, whatever process I'm working on? And then once I was able to like boil that down, the communication of everything really fell into place easier, because then I understood what I was doing, the purpose of what I was doing, and it became very easy to communicate then to other people the entire piece of what I was working with. So it was really boiling down, I guess, keeping the end in sight for that.
Thank you. And a very broad question. How do you handle multiple tasks?
Yeah, so me personally, I think people say like multitasking is a really important skill to learn. I think multitasking is interpreted differently from a lot of people. That the idea of doing two tasks exactly at the same time is not efficient at all. You're not going to be good at it. You're just going to do both of them really terribly. So it's more on like you being able to manage both tasks and do them individually, but then accomplish them if they have deadlines that are concurrent. And so for me, what I would always do is just kind of like I always have this big list of things that I need to do and I really need to get done. And there may be some loose priorities around that list of things, but it's really hard to tackle certain pieces of it or like something's really, really difficult. And so if something's really difficult, the way I handle it is I just try and break it down into as many small pieces as possible and then always just tackle the easiest thing first. Because once you have the easiest thing done first, you can move on to the next thing that you think is really easy. And then you start to build up more and more momentum on those tougher tasks. And then once you have that momentum, you can really get through tasks in a lot more efficient way. So for me, it's kind of like a lay it all out, prioritize, and then just execute everything I could.
Thank you. Are insurance companies the only clients for consulting companies?
Not always, but not always, but they're going to be the most common. I would say when you move away from like an insurance company being your client, you're moving to what tends to be a little bit more of a non-traditional role as an actuary, and maybe you're doing something that is definitely actuarial work, but it's less common. And so it's definitely the most common client is going to be an insurance company.
All right, I'm going to ask this question, though I don't necessarily fully understand it. So if you don't understand it, we can move on. How does your work relate to the common curriculum of financial engineering, often delivered as a master's degree?
Yeah, so my work specifically isn't super similar to financial engineering. Financial engineering tends to be more of like, at least the way I view it personally, is like tying certain products together to like build some sort of financial instrument. Um, what my firm tends to do specifically is help with hedging of specific risks. So it's more on financial risk management rather than like engineering new or building new financial products.
Thank you. Can you provide the names of some life insurance consulting companies?
Yeah, so really for consulting companies, the big names you'll often hear are, you'll hear Milliman quite a bit, as well as the big four accounting firms also have consulting branches. So that would be Deloitte, KPMG, um, PwC, and EY. So you'll hear those names a lot. They're quite big consulting firms, and each one within them has different branches that specialize in life insurance or health insurance. And so life insurance is going to be a big piece of that. Um, off the top of my head, I can think of like Lewis and Ellis, I believe, is another one that's got quite a big life insurance practice. But practices can vary in size. It can be one person working at home to thousands of people working in Deloitte or Milliman.
Thank you. Can you talk to us about your work-life balance as a consulting actuary and what that looks like?
Yeah, so I I'm quite satisfied with my work-life balance. But my stage of life might be different than others, and so other people might have different experiences and they have different priorities. Um, for me, what I really like about this is a specific thing to my firm is that a lot of the people who are here, there's a good mix of people who aren't from Chicago, some aren't from the US. Um, and so a lot of them are completely new to the city and may not really know that many people when they first move here. And a lot of those tend to be in a similar stage of life, at least when you first start, have to be single, have no kids. And so we've really created a lot of friendships with people both within the office and then as well as spending time outside the office together. Um, and so I like that aspect of the company. It's kind of whatever is you prefer, but that's what I've like really well pulled out of my work-life balance. One thing I guess this also brings up with the best way to like balance work and life is there needs to be times when you can really shut the work off when you step away from the office. So say I go to the gym and work out. You really like if you want to be happy with your work-life balance, you can't really be letting things at work kind of overbearing you when you're outside doing different things. Sometimes it's okay to think about those things or like it be on your mind occasionally, but you can't just let it like build up in your mind constantly. It's going to stress you out. That's going to be a big problem.
Thank you so much. We have several questions from career changers who are seeking advice for obviously changing careers, becoming actuaries later on in life, and just the variance of having some have exams, some don't, but just advice for career changers who are looking to become consulting actuaries.
Yeah. So as a career changer, it's kind of a double-edged sword. And in a way, you're coming into the profession maybe with less knowledge or expertise in specifically what actuaries do that people who've gone to college specifically to be an actuary have learned. However, on the other hand, you have way more like life experience and understanding, being one older and a little bit more mature than people who are coming out of college. And you really learn more about what yourself and what you like. And so as a career changer, my suggestion is really just be able to leverage the things that you've used previously in life coming up to this career change. I can think of people who were teachers before they became actuaries. They were elementary school teachers, and then they decided to become an actuary. Um, there's a lot of skills that tie over from being an elementary school teacher to being an actuary. Is like your ability to manage a classroom of kids. It's actually really more helpful than you might think in being able to manage relationships within the workplace or managing people within the workplace. So my suggestion is just talk to as many people as you can, kind of figure out what kind of company you would like to work for, and then really just leverage whatever experience you do have in the past into your new career.
Thank you so much. On the topic of looking at jobs, we're getting some questions from folks who have not had internships or are looking to get internships. Can you just talk about the role of an internship in addition to the exam pathway and everything? And is an internship necessary? What does that currently look like right now?
Yeah, so I would say, well, if you're an experienced person, no, an internship really isn't necessary. It's not absolutely needed. But especially when you're in college, an internship is very, very helpful, both for the company that you're interning at, as well as you yourself, because it's kind of like a two-way, you can think of it as a long-term two-way interview. One, the company wants to know whether you're a good fit for them and whether you have the skill set that will like do well for them in the long run. And then you're also learning whether or not that company is a good fit for you. And it's a place that you want to work overall. And so I always suggest to people, try and get as much experience as you can. So if you can get more internships, that's great. Don't go out like just getting internships just to do it, but really go out with the mindset of that you want to learn what you want to do when you're graduating and you're working full time. So that's really the role that I like to emphasize with internships. Don't focus as much on the work specifically that you're doing. Just make sure that it's generally interesting. You like what that particular company does, and then whether you like the culture of the firm or not.
Thank you. We have a couple questions regarding age and barriers to entry into becoming a consulting actuary. So some folks are older career changers, so later in their career and career changing, looking for their first actuarial role. And some folks have graduated past a non-traditional age college student. Can you just talk about any barriers that age might that folks might face or not face with age?
Yeah, so I would say the specific barrier that you have if you're entering a consulting firm in the middle of your career, or maybe even early in your career, but it's not the first job that you had specifically. The big disadvantage that you have is you have a little bit less specific knowledge on what that specific consulting firm does. And so coming out of college, I've had the advantage of not only as I was learning all of the fundamental concepts behind things that I was doing, I was also learning specifically how Milliman approaches all of these problems and the standardized ways that people at Milliman are able to think through these problems. And so when you come from the outside, you hopefully have a good understanding of some of the fundamental concepts behind everything, but you don't necessarily know how to apply those fundamental concepts in the problem that you're given at the company that you work at. And so it just becomes the barrier that you have to like be able to tie what you know into the specific problems that you're given at the company. And that can be quite a difficult task to be able to handle, but really the best way to do it is just ask as many questions as you can. Don't be afraid to ask questions, especially from people around you, because the expectation isn't for you to know how exactly to do all of those things from whatever firm you're working at. But the expectation is definitely that you'll be able to learn a little bit quicker, maybe than a new hire who's starting fresh and doesn't have the fundamental concepts that you do.
Thank you so much. All right. We have 3 questions in this question, so I'm going to ask them separately because they're all separate. So are there specific actuarial softwares that are commonly used in consulting?
Yes. So it really depends on the firm that you work at. Milliman sells a software called MG Alpha, so you're almost always going to hear about Milliman using MG Alpha, but other firms as well use basically the exact same softwares that insurance companies might use. So you'll hear Profit, MG Alpha, um, GGY Access. There's a bunch of others, but yeah, it's similar software set.
Have you had any experience with the IFRS 17 in your work?
That is not my line of expertise.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm out of that one.
That's okay. And then how did you settle into your specific area in consulting?
Yeah, so in some ways, this one was a little bit of luck. I ultimately like heard of financial risk management when I was in university. I didn't really understand what that exactly meant. And I didn't really understand what that was before I joined Milliman until I really had experience joining Milliman. So it was just a little bit of luck in finding this specific practice. And it's probably going to be that way for anyone who's in college itself. Whereas maybe if you're a little bit more experienced, you have a better understanding of other different practices. Milliman is structured in a little bit of a different way in that each practice is independent of one another. So it's almost like the Milliman practice of financial risk management that's based in Chicago is basically a separate company from the health practice that's based in Omaha. I don't work in health, I'm not very similar to them. While we work at the same company called Milliman, it's our work is very different. I'm never really going to interact with them because they do such different style of work to me. And so myself, I'm a little bit less portable among the different practices at Milliman because I've kind of put myself where in this particular practice. Other consulting firms that are significantly bigger, I'll use Deloitte as an example. There's a ton of people at Deloitte. And the way you'll start there is you're kind of put into this like free agency realm, and you could really have the opportunity to work on a lot of different things. So you could work initially in your first year on health insurance or life insurance, all within the same year. And so you get a little bit more exposure into different practices. And then from what I've been told, you can kind of start to like push your area of expertise into one specific thing that was really interesting to you. And so for me, it was a little bit of luck in that it fit really well for me. But it was also a lot of like learning about what different companies did that I interned or interviewed with rather.
Thank you so much. I just want to let folks know I have turned off asking questions because we have 29 questions and we have 20 minutes left. So I put my email address in the chat. If you need anything or if your question wasn't answered after this, please feel free to email me and I'll help you get that sorted as best as I can. All right, Parker, next question. What would drive someone to become a consultant?
Yeah, so for me, what I really liked about consulting was just things tend to move at a much quicker pace in consulting than they do at insurance companies. Oftentimes just because there are certain deadlines for the project that you have. And there tends to be a lot more projects that you have than maybe some of the regular projects that you have in an insurance company. And so there's a lot larger like pace of learning, and it's just more opportunity to see different companies within the industry that you work at. And so that's really what drove me to consulting. And it's really fit well for me. It just kind of depends on what you enjoy.
Thank you so much. Going back to exams just for just a second, did you feel that you receive enough exam support at your job?
Yes. And I think this really goes for any company, is that you need to spend as much time, you need to spend a lot of time kind of laying out the support that you think you need with your manager specifically, because they're the ones who are going to help you really set aside that time and give you the support that you need for passing those exams. And yeah, I felt like I had enough support. At the end of the day, I would say it's a little bit harder. It's definitely harder to pass exams in a consulting firm than it is at an insurance company, but it's not the barrier that causes people to fail exams. I would say it's more of, if you're motivated to pass the exam, you are going to find the time and you're going to work through to get enough support to be able to pass the exam. So it's really, you need to like take the onus on yourself to set the environment that you need to be able to pass the exam. That's the best support you can have.
Thank you. Okay. Can consulting actuaries create their own firm and offer their services to multiple companies? What are the pros and cons to being an in-house actuary versus contracting?
Yeah, so yeah, consulting actuaries definitely can create their own firm and offer their services as an individual. I would just put a little bit of an asterisk on that, and that you need, in order to create a firm of your own, you need a significant amount of expertise in whatever firm you are creating. As with any company, you really need some sort of advantage that you are selling or providing for others that others in the market cannot provide for you. And it's pretty hard as a consulting actuary, because it would be like you competing as an individual versus another team of people who can really work together to help solve problems, which is usually more effective. So I'm not saying it's impossible, and there's definitely consulting firms that are either just one person or really small teams of people, but it's an uphill battle, especially early on. In terms of the pros and cons of an in-house actuary versus contracting, this is actually a really good question, because financial risk management, the practice that I work in specifically, there's not a ton of competition. We're in a pretty niche market on our own. And so there isn't like a ton of competition from other consulting firms, but there is quite a bit of competition of insurance companies choosing to do this work within their own company versus coming to us and asking for our services. The main advantages of being able to outsource work to a consulting firm could be a multitude of things. It could be it's more cost effective. It just could be an insurance company might be really small and they just don't have the capability to hire and manage and keep busy all of the actuaries that are needed for a particular stream of work that they need. They really just need this one particular thing done. And so it's easier to just, and cheaper to just go to a consulting firm and have them do it. And then in addition to that, consulting firms bring expertise across the entire industry because they get to see more companies and how they approach these problems versus you might not get that broad level of knowledge if you just do this within your own company. On the contrary, as opposed to if you want to do all of this work just within your insurance company itself, in the long run, if you can support all of these actuaries and kind of keep them busy over time, that's generally going to be a cheaper option, right? Because there's no longer this like middleman. You can just have these and like people within your company itself.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Is good early exam performance a valid or good indicator for future actuarial success?
That's a good question. So yes and no. The yes part of it, so oftentimes the base, it, as I kind of alluded to earlier, it's really if you're able to prove that you understand the concepts of what, rather than just passing the exams, you actually understand the concepts behind them and you're able to explain them, that is a very, very good indication of like your performance that's going to be on the job, whether it's even consulting or really any job at all. It could be non-actuarial. That skill set is very important for any line of work. But in terms of how many exams are enough, the way it often works at companies is like 2 is the barrier to being able to get an interview. And then after 2, 3 is pretty nice. This is for new hires, I should say. It's for just brand new hires. And then 3 is pretty nice. After you have the 3rd exam, to be honest, I don't think more really helps you in any way. It's great if you do, and it proves that you have commitment and that you're willing to work hard. And then it's also shows that you're like have a ton of initiative, but it doesn't necessarily make you better than someone who has 2 exams because you could just be in the case where you have a lot more support to be able to pass all of those exams earlier in your career than someone else. So I would say how many are good enough? 2 is probably the really try and get 2 done. But then I'd say 3 is enough. And if you have 3, then you can do more, but also make sure you're working on some of the other like softer skills and you have a wide range of skills, not just exams.
Thank you. All right. Which FSA track did you choose, and did you find it applicable to your daily work? Otherwise, what track would you recommend for your variant of actuarial work?
Yeah, so the tracks are changing quite a bit, and so I'm guessing most of the people who are listening in are, it's not going to be as relevant. It's actually going to be a little bit better for them because for you guys, it's you can kind of choose your own track in a way. There's more flexibility on what you can take, and so you can take a track quote unquote that is as relevant as you can get to your job specifically. So I chose the corporate finance track. There are really 2 main tracks that the people in my practice do. It's either corporate finance or the quantitative investments. Both are very relevant. You could also take the life and annuities track as well, and it could be very relevant to the work that we do specifically. I would say with any track that you have or choose with any FSA exam, some of it's going to be relevant to your job, some of it won't. All of the knowledge that you gain, most of that is going to be pretty relevant to your career as a whole. But I would say once you get to the point where you're choosing a track or which exams that you want to take, it's best to ask the people who have done it at the company you work at and just say, hey, what's the most relevant thing for me? And that's the best way to approach it.
Thank you. A couple questions about the GPA that you need to get an internship. Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, so I, it's kind of interesting now that I am on the other side of it. If I think, honestly, I don't even know if we have a minimum GPA requirement to apply at Milliman. There probably is if we go to recruited colleges. But to be honest, if the resume is in front of me, unless the GPA is like a glaring like 1.0 or something like that, I basically never look at it. I don't bother with it. Um, it I- maybe it means something if you have a good GPA, but I would say GPAs have a tendency to vary across colleges, and then you don't really know what exactly that means. And so for me, it's just however you're going to perform in the interview and how well you convey the knowledge that you have in a specific area. So I would definitely, if I were to put a number on it, I would say try and get above a 3.0 because I've heard that as a barrier for a lot of companies to be able to even apply. Um, and it's sometimes, especially with GPAs, it's hard to get around that sort of barrier. And so really do your best to get above the barrier of requirement that wherever you want to work. And it tends to be, I've heard 3.0, I've heard three, anywhere between 3.0 and 3.5 is what I've heard in the past. I don't know which one's the most relevant.
Thank you. What software skills would consulting companies be looking for in an entry-level applicant?
Yeah, so this one, you'll often hear coding is really important for actuaries. I would say that's definitely true. Like understanding code and being able to code is a very important skill. I don't particularly enjoy coding, so I try and avoid it personally, but it's really like oftentimes, and especially when I came into the workplace, you don't have the full knowledge. Some people do have a really good base of like Python, for example. And so they're able to hit the ground running pretty well because they have such good knowledge on that specific um, software skills. It's more of your ability to learn the software skills that you need for the job. And so someone might have a little bit of expertise in Python, for example, but the best way is just to like choose whatever coding that you particularly want to do. Python is a great choice. That's probably what I suggest to most people. And just being able to maybe apply that knowledge and like build that knowledge base into other areas of code that other companies might use. Because you might join a firm and they don't particularly use Python, they use something else. Um, but the knowledge that you have in one particular software is very, very transferable onto others. So I actually say go more in depth onto one because once you join some sort of company, it's easier to transition to other software types once you get there.
Thank you. I'm going to jump around in the questions now just to get to some that are really relevant to our topic.
Mhm.
So can you tell us what the biggest challenges and rewards of being a consulting actuary are?
Yeah, so I would say the challenges are being able to cope with the quantity and pace of work. And sometimes it's the firm culture at consulting companies can be almost, I don't want to use the term cutthroat because that seems a little bit more like aggressive, but it's very, it, it is that way and it can be quite stressful. Um, and so those kinds of things are the biggest challenges that get applied as a consulting actuary. But I would say the rewards, at least for me, is just overcoming the challenges that are put in front of you. It's very rewarding once you get past it and understand what you've been able to accomplish. Um, and then I would say at consulting firms, they tend to have a lot of people who are highly motivated and really, really want to succeed. And so they are it tends to be a quite diverse group of people that I work with, but we're all very, very goal minded and want to succeed. And working without like that group of people is just very, very rewarding to
Sort of in the same vein, based on the questions being asked, it seems like you've said a lot of reasons to deter from consulting. What makes it better and what Why are you passionate about it?
I'm passionate about it because, well, largely because I really like the style of work that gets done. And like, even though like I really like the challenges that are presented in front of me. Um, and so it is hard work, but I really enjoy doing that hard work. And then at the end of the day, you do get rewarded for it. Your pay is generally higher.
What are your long-term goals in the field of actuary? And as a post-grad actuary, how does one determine those goals?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't, I'm not completely sure. I got my FSA when I got it just under 2 years ago. I got it at the end of 2022. And then I've started to pursue a CFA. Kind of, I guess I didn't take enough exams or something like that. But for my long-term goals, I don't necessarily have a long-term goal. I want to keep progressing and learning at Milliman. I don't know if my career is always going to stick at Milliman, but I just want to keep learning and working on projects that are very interesting to me. Um, and that's definitely kept me in the realm of consulting for quite a while. And I don't have any desire to move. Uh, So it's really the challenges of work. It's just keep pursuing those.
You have flexibility in deciding when to work during the day, presuming you put in the total time that is needed.
Yes, actually, I'm not sure if this is like a consulting or if it's just the practice that I work in. One thing I really like is that it's very flexible. If you get your work done, it doesn't matter too much when you show up to work or when you leave work or what exactly like it's very, very flexible. And I've really appreciated that because it makes life a lot easier and it helps with your work-life balance too, because it's that flexibility is really nice to have. Um, Obviously there's like you probably shouldn't be like working at like starting your job at 8 p.m. and then finishing at like 4 a.m. Not because like you can't get the work done, but it's hard to like meet with other people and like collaborate if those are the hours that you're working. But there's no real like core hours that you have to like be working here. It's just really get the work done, meet with the people you need to meet with, and be flexible with their time as well, and respectful of their time as well. But it's a lot of flexibility on when you work and where you work. Our firm specifically is a hybrid, and we have to come to the office 2 days a week. But sometimes I'm out of town, and so I work for that week out of town, and there's not really any issues with that.
So I'm going to ask one last question. What is the application cycle? I'm sorry, when is the application cycle for early career roles and actuarial consulting roles that you mentioned? And how should folks look for those openings?
Yeah, so I'm typically, if you are a new grad, and the most hiring that's going to occur for newer people, it's going to be in the fall of really in the fall. Um, so the fall, and then you would start in the summer of the following year. So for example, a lot of the hiring that Milliman would do is coming up in September, October this year for people that are going to start in the summer of 2025. Mostly just because we're going to be interviewing a lot of people who are in their last year of college or maybe in their third year of college or second year. Um, and so they're going to graduate or be on summer break during the summer of 2025 or the following summer. So the cycle often starts for that group of people in the fall to winter of the preceding year. Um, the best ways to kind of get into the cycle, if you're at a university and companies come to a career fair, always go to the career fair, go talk to people, go meet people. Honestly, even if you don't want to work at the company, just go out and talk to them. It's good practice for you. I know when I went through the interview process of like trying to figure out where I wanted to work, I talked to anyone I could. And sometimes I would go through an interview and be like, well, that was terrible. I was awful. But that's okay, because at the end of the day, there's no real harm done. All that happens is that you kind of wasted 30 minutes of your time. So it's not really a big deal. But yeah, just really talk to as many people as you can. If you're on the boat of being an experienced hire, that one's a little bit different. It's really company specific on what they're looking for in terms of experienced hires, but it really tends to just be throughout the entire year. And so the best strategy for that is finding someone at the specific company that you're looking to apply for and kind of talking to them and understanding what their work is like or what their recruiting is like.
Awesome, Parker. Thank you so much. We are over time and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Are there any last words that you want? That sounded more dramatic. Are there any final words for this that you wanted to leave us with before we go?
No, just I would suggest for people as if they're kind of looking between consulting or an insurance company, it's just talk to people in both and really talk to as many people as you can to understand what they like about their job, whether they suggest consulting or not, and kind of figure out what works best for you, because everyone's different. Consulting's not for everyone. Insurance companies aren't for everyone.
Mhm.
And so it's best to find where you fit best.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Parker, and thank you so much to everyone who participated today. This will be available as a recording in the next few days as soon as we get it up on YouTube. And I look forward to seeing everyone next month for our next Answers from an Actuary. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Parker.
Yeah, thank you.